Greetings class and welcome to week 12. This week we're going to be talking about threats, attacks, and vulnerabilities. And in this chapter we're going to look at kind of a preview, or for those who have already taken CIS 4710, the information security class, it might be a review. So we're going to talk a lot about malware and viruses and all the kinds of stuff that you have to be aware of that's out there. But for the Security Plus certification, you have to be aware that they're going to give you questions in regards to analysis of how a system gets compromised, and malware is one of those attack vectors that has to be analyzed. So we're going to compare and contrast the different types of malware attacks. So first off is identifying how or if you are infected, if you've caught something on your system such as a virus. So when I pose this question to my in-person classes, I ask, hey, what's one of the symptoms or the telltale signs that your system's been infected? And I get some answers sometimes where they say, oh, well, my antivirus tells me that I have a quarantine or something like that. Well, not all viruses or threats are identified or identifiable by your antivirus. So then the question poses, how do you tell if you have an infection? And the second answer I typically get is, oh, well, I see a performance decrease. I see programs taking longer to load, or I see applications slowing down. And that's another good telltale sign. However, with viruses and malware being as sophisticated as they are today, and with systems being as fast and as robust as they are today, that is one of the signs that you can't always bank on anymore. Because if we have say a high-end gaming system and you get a virus that does not spike your CPU, it's meant to kind of be dormant and rest in the background and just perpetuate like a remote access Trojan, that's not always a telltale sign. So you have to be a little bit more creative. And SIEMs and other types of host-based intrusion prevention, intrusion detection systems are doing just that. They're not only looking at applications that are running or could be resident in memory, or looking at files on a system and scanning the files. They're looking at behaviorisms. What is the system doing? What is the operating system being asked to do? Why is this application running? What is the purpose of this application? Does this application run on a regular basis? Is it new? So it's getting more intelligent in that sphere. But there are different types of viruses that we look at. And we have a listing here. Armored, companion, macro, multipartite. And as I turn here in the book, I'm actually going to do a reference in chapter 9. One second. There's a lot of terminology in this chapter. Make sure that you check that out on page 278 through 282, excuse me. So on 285, it kind of goes over the definitions of all these different types of viruses. And pay particular attention, because on the Security Plus exam, they'll throw, the characteristics of a polymorphic virus is, or the virus attack that is a legitimate to programs and then creates a program with a different file name extension, right? That's a companion virus. They'll throw scenarios like that at you on the Security Plus exam. So know these definitions. Crypto malware and ransomware in particular is very problematic today because it is a leverage that an attacker has in order to extort payment from the victim. Ransomware has hit every different industry, every different type of organization over the last few years, and they have not been very promising as to being able to correct it, because the attack vector for a lot of these attacks are in the form of an email or a link or a clickjack, something of that nature. And we as humans, of course, being the trusting folks that we are, we actually look at that and try to say, "Oh, that looks really good. Let me click on this link." Don't do that. Educating folks as cyber professionals is going to be one of the hardest parts and aspects of your job. But we're going to focus here on a couple of different ones today, in particular DOS and DDoS. Denial of service is as old as the almost as old as the internet. So what a denial of service is basically keeping you from accessing some service, whether it's DNS, a web page, mail, file sharing service, etc., from others. And distributed denial of service is nothing more than the ability to do that with multiple hosts, typically called bots or zombies. And a bot herder or a zombie herder basically controls those through a single system. Bots were typically controlled through IRC chat channels, but zombies can be controlled in a variety of different ways these days. Alright, some other attacks that you see. Man in the middle, buffer overflows. Buffer overflows are one that are a nuisance, but they can be very problematic, especially if memory is not managed correctly. If a programmer or an app dev person creates an instance where memory is not being managed correctly, and I can overflow the stack, the memory stack, I can inject executable code in that stack and then pretty much do what I want to, especially if I have system privileges. And that is typically a springboard to do some sort of code injection. Cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgeries are to trick a person into, again, clickjacking and being able to take control of their system. Privilege escalation is the art of being able to uplift yourself from a standard user account to an admin account, or from an admin account to the system account. And with the higher privilege, the more you can do, obviously. Other types of attacks that are explained in Chapter 9, ARP poisoning, which is more of a network-based attack, and it is meant to, it can be used in a couple different ways. It can be used in conjunction with a spoofing attack, or it can be used in conjunction with a denial of service attack. A DNS poisoning is where we basically poison the DNS server and we can redirect traffic to wherever we want to based on that. Domain hijacking is very similar to DNS poisoning, where we take control of not the IP address but of the domain and point it to the IP address that we want. A man in the browser is basically where we have underlying code on a website, not within the browser itself, to gain access to your browser to things such as cookies. Zero-day exploits, and I'm going to emphasize this here a little bit. 0 days, there's no defense against them. Sorry, there's not any defense against them. Anybody that tells you otherwise is wrong. And I've come across several times in my career where I've had a salesperson or a sales engineer come and try to sell me snake oil that their product can stop a 0-day attack. That is actually impossible. Now, you do have services such as Talos and others that can drastically reduce the time of identifying a 0-day, getting a signature for a 0-day, and helping with a patch for a 0-day, and reducing that down to days, if not hours. And that's great because it's a race against time, because if a organization gets hit with a 0-day, we can minimize the impact. But you cannot prevent a 0-day. By definition, that is impossible. So if somebody tries to sell you a product or a software package or a service, start laughing, please. Remember this lecture, and don't be afraid to tell them, "Oh, I was warned against you." Replay attacks are pretty old, and systems such as Radius and TACAX prevent them. But a replay attack is basically where we have captured a string or a conversation. We try to throw it back at a system in hopes of gaining access to said system. Other types of attack, passing the hash. So as you know, passwords are saved in systems, not in clear text, but in hashes. So if we can get those hashes in some fashion, we can capture a hash through a listening attack or through a RSPAN attack. We can try to crack those hashes. Hijacking and other related attacks, basically where we do some sort of TCP hijack or a man-in-the-middle attack. Driver manipulation, this is always fun. So this affects Windows systems more often than anybody else. And it is where we can incorporate through either an update or some other form of file upload, the replacement of a DLL, Dynamic Link Library file. And if we can do that, we can actually write code within that Dynamic Link Library. And once that DLL is called by the program that uses it, we can execute code. And that code can be just about anything, because a lot of app dev folks, a lot of programmers don't do any type of program validation of their dynamic link libraries. Spoofing attacks, we touched on this a little bit before. This is where we have either a MAC address, a hardware address, or an IP address that we mimic. And when somebody tries to use their MAC address, we can listen for it, and then we can masquerade as that victim and pretend that we are them, and then hopefully log on or gain access in some form or fashion to information that they are privy to. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about incident response. So the chapter outlines the ways that you can find a threat. So they look at passively finding threats, where we do a lot of listening ourselves, and we look at traffic and traffic patterns, things such as net flow. We can interpret results from a security incident and event management server, a SIEM, S-I-E-M. We can identify vulnerabilities through scans. We can identify lack of security controls, and these could be manual security controls, physical controls, logical controls. Both are susceptible to this through an audit. And we can identify common misconfigurations. This is really helpful in GPOs, group policy objects, network configurations and routers and switches, password length, password complexity, things of that nature that are commonly overlooked or are set or misconfigured, as it suggests, by the sysadmin. And we do this by leveraging different types of security tools. We can use a port scanner, like Nmap or ZenMap, to see what open ports we have. We can look at banners on web pages and look and see what they're running. Is there any underlying code? Is it susceptible to having code ran in the banner or the footer? What types of vulnerability scanners can we use? OpenVOS is one that we use quite a bit. We also have used Nessus's vulnerability scanner in 4710. And then there's honeypots and honeynets, and these are basically systems that, I think we've talked about it before, that basically sit there and they're a red herring. They try to entice the attacker to attack them instead of everything else, so we can look at the tools and the techniques that the attackers are using in order for us to become better defenders, or at least drive them away from the main target that they're looking to attack. And then kind of bringing it all back in line with what we talked about in the first couple of chapters, risk calculation and a risk assessment. These are baseline reports, things such as code reviews, looking at and understanding our own attack surface, what is vulnerable, what is susceptible to attack, what are the methods that they can be used to attack our infrastructure, our code, etc. And then do design reviews and figure out, well, is there a better way to defend the space, the data, the network, the system? And what tools are out there to help us with that? How expensive are they to deploy? And do they give us, as a business, a benefit for their use? So, end of week 12 here coming up, and it looks like, take a look at the syllabus right here. We have quiz 4 due this week, so make sure that you get that accomplished. It's only about 10 questions, I believe, so it will cover the last couple of chapters that we've done, including cryptography and threat, and this chapter, threat, attack, and vulnerabilities. And then next week, chapter 13, we have social engineering, one of my favorite topics. We'll get to that in chapter 10. So with that, make sure that you're doing your homework, make sure that you're getting the labs turned in, and we're closing down on the end of the semester here, so start studying for that final exam that's coming up as well. So that's all I have here for this lecture. So until next time, this is Professor Brown. We'll see you around.